There's a couple things that I'd like to do today. I want to pick up on a theme that we started last week. This idea of your life is your canvas. You know, what is it that we are creating on that blank canvas of life, where we can allow that joy and that happiness that is within us, that is our true nature, to come out and to be manifest in this life. So let's go back to that picture where we started last week. Let's go back to that scene. If you can close your eyes, maybe close them. Let's go back to that scene where we're sitting on a bench, perhaps on the boardwalk, looking down over a beach. And the beach is full. There are people of all ages, of all sizes, of all shapes, of all colors. Everybody is just having fun. Everybody is enjoying life. And pay particular attention now to the children. They're engaged in all sorts of activities. Mind you, there's only one beach. But some little ones are walking to the water's edge, holding mommy or daddy's hands and picking their feet up high in the air, testing the waters gently. Others are just running and splashing and jumping on little boogie boards and sliding in 2 or 3 inches of water. Some are trying to gather the little crabs that scurry up and down the beach. Some are digging holes in the sand, trying to find the crabs in their hiding place. Some are making sand castles. Some are flying kites. And each and every one of them is experiencing joy, just sheer joy. Now I invite you to consider, which of those children is you? What are you doing on that beach? What fulfills your soul? What allows you to experience happiness? What are you doing? Joy is already within us. We just have to let it out. Now, the next thing I would like you to consider is a mirror. Whatever type mirror you want to consider. I want you to think about how that mirror works. Whatever you put in front of that mirror, the mirror will reflect right back to you. If you put something red in front of the mirror, it will reflect something red back to you. If you put something blue, blue will come back to you. If you turn out all the lights, nothing will come back to you. The mirror doesn't add. The mirror doesn't change. The mirror simply shows you what is. What is. The mirror of your life is consciousness, your consciousness. What do you believe? What do you expect and accept as normal? That's what you believe. And what is coming back to you in your life is being reflected from that mirror that we call the law of mind, that power that does it unto you according to your belief. And what you are seeing in your life reflected back to you is your belief, or are your beliefs. It is your consciousness. This is why 2 children on the same beach can have a totally different experience. This is why why two people working in the same environment can have a totally different experience. When we moved to Denver in '87, one of the fellows who had gone there, our company started in the Research Triangle Park area, and then as we expanded into the U.S. marketplace, we started these different regional offices. So we each kind of took turns going out and working in these different field offices for a couple of years, and then coming back to Raleigh and going back out to another one, coming back to Raleigh. That was kind of our lives in those days. So when I got to Denver, I knew most of the people there because they had come from Raleigh. And then one fellow who I had known before he went out there, he said, "Is there anything you want to do, while you're here in Denver?" And everybody knew we were only there for a couple of years, and then we were going to be gone. And I said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to go whitewater rafting." And he said, "Oh, no, you don't want to go whitewater rafting." And I said, "Why not?" He says, "Well," he says, "there's two things they don't tell you." He says, "The first thing they don't tell you is that the water is freezing cold." He says, it's snow melt coming down from the mountains. He says, if it wasn't moving, it might very well be frozen. He says, it's freezing cold. It's miserable cold. He says, and the second thing they don't tell you is that every raft turns over sooner or later. He says, so when you get tossed out of the boat and you hit that freezing cold water, it's not a pleasant experience. So he went on to describe his experience. They were coming down the river, and they call it a chute. It's kind of a narrow current in the river between some rock formations. And the raft went through the chute and it tipped over. And he hit the water, and it took his breath away. And all he wanted to do was to get a big gulp of air. And he tried to breathe in, and when he did, he sucked in a big mouthful of ice cold river water, and it went down his throat and got in his lungs. He's trying to cough, and the current is tumbling him over and over and over, and he's going down, and he's hitting the bottom. The river wasn't very deep up there, hitting the bottom of the river, and he's coming back up, and you could see the swirling waters above him. And he was trying to reach his head up through the surface and almost get his head up through the surface, try to take another breath of air, breathe in more water. And he's struggling, and he's struggling, and he's struggling. And he said, finally he realized, he said, I must be the biggest fool in the world. I paid $150 to come up here this weekend and drown myself. And not only that, but I talked all my friends into it. And he said he really thought he was going to die. So he just gave up. He just let go. He just surrendered. And when he stopped struggling, of course the life jacket he had on brought him right to the surface, spun him around, and turned his head into the upstream currents so he could breathe. And the current kind of pushed him off to the side of the river into these little eddy pools. Have you ever been by those rivers? There's these little pools just on one side of the river. They just go in a circle. The water just comes in there and circles around and around and around. And he got pushed off into one of those and started spinning around. And he looked up, and there was a tree branch hanging down, a low-hanging branch that he could grab. And he grabbed it. And he pulled himself up, and he held on, and he took a deep breath, and he said he was alive. He was alive. And then he started to think about all his friends who were in the raft. How was he going to go back home and explain to their families, that he survived somehow, and everybody else had drowned, because he knew that somehow he must have been the only one who could possibly have lived through this experience. And he looked up the river, and here came the next rafter down, and it was his friend, and his friend had brought along a waterproof camera. And his friend's head was bobbing up out of the water, and he was spinning around 360 degrees, and he was shouting, "Yippee, yippee," and he was taking pictures of the world as the world spun around. He was having the time of his life. And I'd always remember that story, because it was the same river, you see. And it was two totally different experiences. One was an experience of struggle, of fear, of worry, of guilt, of doubt. And the other was going with the flow and having a blast. the same river. And what was different? The consciousness, the attitude. Life was reflecting back to each one of those individuals what was in their consciousness. Keep that image with you. Keep that picture with you. As you're going through life, are you morbid? Are you terrified? Are you struggling? Or are you floating along in the stream, bobbing up and down, taking pictures to show the gang back home? So this is what we want to talk about today. This is the idea that we want to talk about today. And the third image I want to leave you with is one we use quite often, and that is of the movie projector. And I want you to go back to the days of film, when we actually had film in projectors. And you have this perfect white light, this perfect light bulb. There's actually ratings on the light bulb as to what kind of light comes out of the light bulbs. I mean, this is how much of a science there was to this whole industry, which is greatly changed now. But I want you to imagine that light in the bulb and the projector is perfect white light. And it is shining through the film. And the light, as it passes through the film, is focused by the lens, so it forms a clear image on the screen. Now, as you and I are sitting in the theater and we're watching that movie, we lose sight of the fact. We get drawn into the film, we get drawn into the drama, we get drawn into the cinematography. If the cinematographers are really doing their job, that camera just draws us right into the scene. And we're there. And we completely lose all perspective that this is nothing more than images projected by light onto a screen. And in fact, the images themselves are not moving. If you take the film and hold it up, you can see that each frame is a still picture. And of course, the camera has taken a series of still pictures in rapid sequence. I think it was 24 frames a second they used in the movies. And the projector is projecting them back at that same speed, 24 frames per second. And in between each of those individual frames, as they flash up on the screen, there's a blank spot. The shutter actually closes on the projector. It goes dark for just an instant while the film advances. The shutter opens, the light projects the next frame, shutter closes. See? And we lose sight of that. We don't see that flicker. We're just sitting there and we lose sight of the technicalities of how that is produced. And we get caught up in the drama. We get caught up in that drama. My friend, who was floating down the river certain that he was going to die, was caught up in the drama. He was caught up in it. So what we want to consider then, that today's talk is the yoke is sweet, the burden is light. And of course that comes from the words of Jesus in the New Testament. The yoke is sweet, the burden is light. Why are we here? For what purpose have we been created? And are we fulfilling that purpose? And how do we know? How do we know if we are fulfilling that purpose? The yoke is sweet. The burden is light. Now, yoke in that context was like the yoke of oxen. The wooden frame that they put the two oxen in and held the oxen kind of together, and then they could attach drawbars from the yoke back to the wagons or the plow, and they could make the animal work. But the other context of yoke is similar to what the word yoga comes from, the root of the word yoga, and the root of the word religion which means to bind together, to bind together. And the yoke that the New Testament is talking about is not the yoke of a beast of burden. It is the binding of our consciousness, of our soul, the remembering, the awareness of the presence and the activity of the divine in our lives. That's the yoke that's sweet. Coming to conscious awareness, coming to realization, coming to experiencing on a daily basis that we are not alone, that the love of God is with us. And the burden is light. The burden is light. To me, there's kind of two things to consider. The burden is light. And one is that we human beings, and I've mentioned this many times, we human beings, we tend to make things much harder than they need to be. We will take something simple and we will make it difficult, you know. Think of the games that children play naturally, you know. You give them a ball and they kick it around the field, and then we come along and we draw lines and we make it into soccer, and there's rules, and it becomes more and more difficult, and the people who do it best become millionaires, you know. But there was a time when we were children when we just ran and kicked the ball for no reason whatsoever. So the burden being light can mean a couple things, I think. One is that we can make this idea of our spiritual growth, we can turn it into work. We can turn it into a burden. We can turn it into a struggle. You know, picture the movies where you see the medieval monks and they're beating themselves with the whip. Turn it into a struggle. Make it hard. Fight. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. I want you to think of the caterpillar and the butterfly. I'll give you one more visual for today. Think of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. What does the caterpillar have to do to become the butterfly? What does the caterpillar have to know in order to become the butterfly? Does the caterpillar have to study? Does the caterpillar have to work hard? Does the caterpillar have to stay up nights trying to get ahead of other caterpillars? None of that. None of that. In fact, there is nothing that the caterpillar could do or not do, because it is its destiny to be the butterfly. The butterfly is the caterpillar is the butterfly. But the transcendence or the transformation from caterpillar to butterfly is something that occurs naturally. It is something that occurs through a power that is already there within the caterpillar. Through a knowledge, if you want to call it a knowledge, through a wisdom, if you want to call it a wisdom, through a guidance. There's just something that happens there. And think of how wonderful that is, because if you and I were that caterpillar with the consciousness that we have, the awareness that we have, and somebody would tell us, listen, you're going to go into this little thing, it's called a cocoon, and you're going to go in there, and when you go in there, you're going to completely dissolve. Your entire form is just going to turn to mush. It's going to turn to jelly, and you're going to be in there for months. Everything that you had ever known, everything that was ever familiar to you, your little caterpillar feet and your little caterpillar antenna, whatever it might be, they're all going to disappear. They're all going to go away. And this physical body that you have is going to go away. But trust me, in a while something better is going to emerge. Can you imagine somebody coming to you with that proposition? You'd go, okay, yeah, I'll get back to you on that one. The caterpillar can't do that. The caterpillar can't choose. Caterpillar can't decide. But we can. We can. So that's what we're talking about today. This burden is light. This burden of growing spiritually is light. It doesn't have to be as hard as we make it. It's as natural as falling off a log. It's as joyful as a child on the beach playing. And then the rest of life, making a living, engaging in hobbies, being in love, raising our families, all of those things, they don't have to be a burden. They don't have to be hard. So what we want to consider, what we want to think about as we go through this, is that we are all sitting here watching this movie screen. And what's playing out on the movie screen is nothing more than a reflection of race consciousness. The film that is going through the projector of what we see in the news, what we watch on TV, what we hear on the radio, what we observe in the workplace, what we're seeing projected out there, all of that, is nothing more than the play of consciousness upon itself. Nothing more than the play of life upon itself. Nothing more than the collective consciousness of people who are in the process of remembering the truth of their being. And part of that race consciousness is a belief in the necessity of struggle. So the first thing that we have to do if we really want to live our lives and experience life so that the burden is light and the yoke is sweet, is we have to distance ourselves from that consciousness. We have to insulate, isolate, and inoculate, as Dr. Holmes tells us, ourselves from that consciousness. It may be true for everybody else, you know. It's true because they believe it needs to be true. It's true because they create the rules and regulations and the laws that make it so. But that doesn't have to be your experience. It is not your truth. And it doesn't have to be your experience. So the first thing that we want to consider along the lines of the yoke is sweet, the burden is light, life doesn't have to be a struggle. We have come here to be God's expressions of joy. And when we struggle, we're not fulfilling that purpose. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to consider our concept of God. Remember, we start every January 1st. What is your concept of God? What is this thing called God? What is this thing itself? Have we been created to suffer? Have we been created to be punished? Have we been created to be tested? Have we been created to struggle because that's what makes us better? Or are these rationalizations, are these human beings making up stories to explain why things are the way they are? I was listening to some tapes by Rocco Errico, who talks a lot about the Aramaic language and the Aramaic culture and the Aramaic customs from which Scripture, both the New Testament and the Old Testament, come to us. And we sit here in the United States in the year 2018, and we try to read something that was written thousands of years ago in a different language, in a different culture, and we try to think we understand it without trying to understand the context. And I always laugh when we try to do that, because I remember trying to understand Shakespeare in high school. And that was only written 400 or 500 years ago. And it was written in the same language we're supposed to be speaking today, English. And I read it and I go, what? And even more contemporary, I read Emerson. Emerson was written in 1840s, let's say. And the way he used words, and what the words meant. The same word that we use today has a different meaning today than the one that was popular in 1840s. So Rocco Errico is trying to explain that many of the stories in the Bible were written by way of explanation. So he said, imagine a father and a child are walking down the road and they come to the ruins of this place called Sodom and Gomorrah, and the child says, Daddy, what happened to this place? What happened to the people that used to live here? And for the father, it's a great teaching moment. The father said, well, those people didn't listen. They didn't obey. They didn't do what they were told. And God punished them. You know? So it's kind of like today, you know, if the kids do something, say, what happened to those kids over there? Well, those are the kids that didn't do their homework, you see. And that's what happens to the kids that don't do their homework. So we don't necessarily understand that, and we try to take things out of context. And by this way of explanation, you can understand inquiring minds saying, well, you know, why do we suffer? Why is there pain? Why do we give birth to our children in pain? Why do we eat our bread by the sweat of our brow? Why do we get sick? The problem of evil, the one that theologians all wrestle with. The problem of evil, if God is so good, why do these things suffer? Where do we come from? And the explanation that became popular is, well, we sinned, and God is punishing us, or God is testing us, or God is strengthening us. And what we want to do is we want to back up and take a look at that and say, is there another way of looking at this? And what Dr. Holmes invites us to consider is the only sin is a mistake, and the only punishment is a consequence of the mistake. If you put your hand on the hot burner of the stove, that's a mistake, and you get burned, and that's the punishment. That's the consequence. And that's as far as we need to go. We're looking into the mirror, and the mirror is giving back to us what we believe. If we believe we need to be punished, we will experience what we call punishment. If we believe we are not worthy, we will experience the unworthiness. So the first place, or the place where we have to start, is we have to trust in the universe. We have to trust in God. We have to trust that all of God is for us and none of God is against us. And we have to trust that there's nothing in the universe that wishes us ill will. God does not wish us ill will. Somewhere it says in Scripture, if God is for us, who can be against us? If all of God is for us, what can be against us? What can be against us? And this is the attitude that I'm talking about developing. This is the outlook on life that I'm talking about developing. We want to change the film in the projector from one that accepts and expects as normal bad things to happen because that's what we deserve, to expect and accept as normal good things to happen, life-affirming things to happen, that which gives a greater expression of life and of love and of truth and of beauty. That's what we expect to happen, because that is God expressing itself as us. Think of the children on the beach. Think of the children on the beach playing. You know, at the end of the day, they're worn out. If you're ever taking the kids to the beach, you know, like by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're ready to go down for a nap. That doesn't matter, even if they're bigger kids. They wear themselves out. They throw themselves into play. Right? They expend so much energy for no apparent purpose other than joy, other than having fun. But yet they give everything they have to it. And if we ask them to work that hard, they'd balk. They'd say, no, go clean your room. No, I can't do it. Go mow the grass. No, I can't do that. It's too hot out there. It's too hot out there. Oh, but we can go to the beach and we can run for hours. We can play Frisbee and we can catch. What is the difference? What is the difference right? One is the expenditure of work, one is the expenditure of effort, excuse me, that is fulfilling, And the other is the expenditure of energy into that which is drudgery, because it's not fulfilling. So the second thing that we want to consider then is life desires to fulfill itself as us. God desires to fulfill itself as us. So we come back and we say, well, this thing that we call God, this concept of God that we have. Now keep in mind that the word God is only a word, and that word is only a verbal symbol of our thought or our idea. And everybody has a different idea. So we use the word God, and everybody has a different idea of what that is. So we want to kind of move back a little bit. We don't want to get hung up on the words or saying, well, I know exactly what that is. We want to go back and say, this thing called God is so far beyond our intellect's ability to understand that we don't want to limit it. We don't want to define it. We don't want to try to put it into a box and make it a judge and make it a grouchy old man sitting on a throne writing down who's naughty and who's nice and who's going to get coal in their stockings and things like that. As Emmett Fox, I believe, says, that's the Santa Claus version of God. Santa Claus is just a more modern creation of this concept. So the divine already is and already has everything that there is. It is omniscience. It is omnipotence. It is omnipresence. So it does not create out of need, out of lack, out of want. You know, you and I might grow food because we're hungry, and we know we're going to be hungry, so we need to go out and till the garden and put some seeds in there, and we need to go out and take care of them, because eventually we're going to need to eat whatever it is that we're planting. And that is creating out of a need. But the divine doesn't have a need in that sense. It doesn't lack anything. It's not, the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention, is, it doesn't need. So why then would it create? Why would it create anything? Why does it create anything? And its creation is just an expression of its isness, of its suchness, of its beingness. It can't help but create. It's part of its very nature. So the best that we can figure is that its motivation is joy. It's expressing its life joyfully. That's what it is doing. The divine is expressing its life joyfully. And that expression of its life is what we call creation. What we call creation. Now this puts the whole experience of being a human being here on earth at this time, it puts it into a totally different light. We get away from the struggle. We instead of floating down a stream thinking we're going to drown, we get away from the struggle and we say, wait a second. Divine love created this to experience joy to experience itself in some unique way. So the individualized expression of the divine that we call the soul, that is the essence of what you and I are, in some of the ancient traditions, the explanation of the problem of evil, or to put it another way, if we are unique individualized expressions of God, why isn't the world a more perfect place to live? And one explanation that we come across that I think is worthy of consideration. I don't know that it happened exactly this way, but it's a good explanation. Right? Remember, we're all trying to explain the ineffable. Is that the divine wished to give because it didn't need to receive anything. Then the only thing that it could do was give. But it needed something to give to and something to give through. So the first act of creation was to create a vessel capable of receiving. That is the soul. But in this mythology, in this creation story, the soul was in close proximity to the divine, and the soul was trying to cooperate with the divine will to give. So the soul was trying to empty itself out of everything it had as quickly as it could, so that the divine would have something to give to. But it couldn't empty itself out fast enough. The faster it would go, immediately it would be refilled. And the vessels cracked from the struggle, from the effort. They cracked. So the first first act of creation didn't work out so well. Now, mind you, this has to be a teaching story, right? So you can't imagine God doing something and say, well, that didn't work, I'll try something different. Omniscience, omnipotence. So the vessels, the souls, us, realized that they needed to move into an experience of temporary separation from the close proximity to the divine. Then they could empty themselves out, and then they could be refilled slowly over time, over this experience of time. And in them being refilled slowly over the experience of time, the divine would experience the joy of discovering itself in some unique way. So each and every one of us, if you want to consider this, we are those vessels that have emptied ourselves out. We have come into the world and we have separated ourselves temporarily from the knowledge of our oneness with the divine. And we are each discovering this creation, this magnificent creation, we are each discovering in our own individualized way. And as we each celebrate, as we each take delight and relish and joy and happiness in this life, the divine is experiencing its creation wonderfully and uniquely as us. And when we do this, when you and I do this, we know it because we are fulfilled. Right? We are like the children playing hard on the beach and wouldn't stop for a minute until they drop exhausted. But they are fulfilled, as opposed to somebody who is told, listen, your punishment for the rest of the day is I want you to go out in the hot sun and you're going to kick that ball down the beach until I tell you to stop. You know? Can you imagine that? You imagine if we went to a prison and cleaned it out, took a group of prisoners to the beach and said, here's a ball and you're going to run and kick it. And you're not going to stop until we tell you. Suddenly the same activity would seem to be a punishment, would seem to be a struggle, would cease to be fun. So what we want to do, the yoke is sweet, the burden is light. What Dr. Holmes tells us is that which keeps us from experiencing happiness is our belief in the separation, our belief that somehow God is over there and God is good and somehow we're over here and we're not good and God is looking down and getting ready to punish us. And the yoke, the binding together that we're talking about, is when we identify with and when we unify with and when we associate our mental concept, our consciousness, when we recognize that we are part of God's expression. We are a unique part, we are a wonderful part, and we are a very necessary part of God's creation. And coming into this consciousness of unity to a greater degree does not have to be a burden. It does not have to be hard. We do not have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and light candles and incense and sit for hours and make ourselves do it. We may do it because it's fun. We may do it because we want to do it. We may do it because we enjoy doing it. But if it's work, if we have turned it into work through our consciousness, then we have defeated the very purpose before we have begun. What is it that allows you to experience joy? What is it that if you won the sweepstakes tomorrow and you had $1 bazillion to live any way you want for the rest of your life, what is it that you would do? What is it that if I asked you, like I asked you at the beginning, I asked you, which child on the beach are you? If I asked you in this beautiful playground that we have of this world, what is it that brings you joy? What is it that brings you joy? What is it that fulfills you? What is it that you would do until you drop from exhaustion and love every single minute of it? What is that? See? And that is what's feeding your soul. That is what is the divine expressing itself through you. The divine creates to express itself. Or perhaps another way of saying it is, creation is the divine expressing itself. And its purpose is joy. Its attitude is joy. Its outlook is joy. It knows nothing, knows nothing of unhappiness. When we are living our lives expressing joy, the divine is fulfilling itself as us. When we are living our lives in a manner that does not express joy, the divine doesn't suffer. The divine doesn't suffer. Think of the motion picture screen. The light is okay regardless of the pain and suffering on the screen. The pain and suffering on the movie screen is just the film running in front of the light. The divine is okay. But when we are in tune with the infinite, Ralph Waldo Trine's work in being in tune with the infinite, when we are in tune with the infinite, something is using us for its purpose. Something is using us for its own purpose. So the last thing that we have to consider then is that when my friend in the river finally gave up and surrendered, when he let go of the struggle, when he accepted the inevitability of his fate, that's when everything turned around for him. That's when everything changed. And what we must do in our individual lives is give up this sense of struggle if we have it. Loving God is not hard. No harder than a small child loving grandma or grandpa. Loving God is not hard. Finding God is not hard. We just look out the window at the magnificence of God's creation. For those who live at the beach, I mean, Lori and I love to go down to the beach and just watch the dolphins at play. One time we went down there and spontaneously, and the only hotel we could get was on the Intercoastal Waterway, or just before you go over the bridge there at Wrightsville. And we were sitting on the balcony in the morning having our coffee, looking out, and this beautiful dolphin came and just stood up on its tail and danced on its tail, and then went right back in the water, right in front of us, almost like it was a private show. Can you feel the joy in God's creation? Can you marvel at what we discover? The most amazing thing about us is our ability to think, our ability to control what we're thinking, our ability to change that picture on the screen from a happy picture, from a sad picture to a happy picture. Our ability to choose whether we're going to be bobbing up and down the river taking pictures to show our friends back home, or floating down the river terrified that we're going to die. That's up to us. That's up to us. And we must choose. God cannot do for us what God has created us to do. And God created us to choose, to make decisions. So I invite you to take some time, maybe today, maybe you can go to a quiet place, maybe tomorrow. Take some time. What is the mirror of your life reflecting back to you? What kind of a God do you believe in? What do you expect and accept as normal? What can you be doing right now to experience the same joy that you felt? Remember at the beginning I said go to that time and place where you felt joy? If you're still not feeling that, what can you be doing to be feeling that? To be experiencing that? The difference between the drudgery of work and the joy of play is an attitude, is an outlook. And you are the only one who can control your outlook, who can adjust your attitude. The yoke is sweet. As we come closer and closer to our experience of the presence of God, the yoke is sweet and we feel the joy and we wish to be joyful. The burden is light because there's a power within us available to us that knows how to do and is capable of doing all that ought to be done as us, through us, and for us. And we have to let go of the idea that we're going it alone. We have to make it happen. We have to struggle. We have to fight. We have to control. We, or I, or ego. Get up in the morning tomorrow and ask yourself, how would God enjoy this day as me? And I accept into my life today, this daily bread, into my life today, everything that's appropriate. All of the money, all of the materials, all of the goods, all of the services, all of the friends, all of the ideas, everything. When our kids were little, they played various baseball teams. And at that time, John Fogerty's song, "Put Me In, Coach," would blare through the speakers. So somebody on the bench would have the boom box, and "Put Me In, Coach" would play. And I think of that. Get up in the morning. Put me in, Coach. I'm ready to play today. And see what magic unfolds as you surrender to the purpose for which you were created, to live your life as God's instrument of joy. And so it is.